a Finance Committee meeting. Mrs. Lentz has some information to add to you as we prepare to finalize our budget at the next meeting, which will be June 23rd. So, Mrs. Lentz, the floor is yours.
Public comment?
Oh, public comment, please. Thank you, sir. Yes, I'm sorry.
Good evening. Ed Gallagher from Lower Frankfort Township. I was a Big Spring School Board Director and the Board Treasurer from 1999 to 2007. When I joined the school board, there was a fairly large fund balance, and during my first budget cycle, I was among those saying we should incorporate those funds into the budget. In other words, spend the fund balance quickly. Others tried to point out the disadvantages of spending down the fund balance rapidly. Well, we spent it down pretty quickly, and just as quickly, I began to see firsthand what those disadvantages were. Needing a big tax increase, as well as not having that fund balance available at a time when the board was moving forward with building a new high school. It was a lesson learned that I remember to this day. When I look at the current numbers, I see a smaller fund balance, percentage-wise, than what we were looking at 25 years ago. And I see even bigger challenges and pitfalls. It appears to me that anything less than a 1.5% property tax increase this year will set the district up for difficulties in the coming years. And when I say difficulties for the district, that means for you as school board directors. You might see the need to impose a much larger tax increase than the 1.5% that's proposed for this year. But the Act 1 index is expected to decrease over the next few years, as I think you've already been advised, making it difficult to have an increase large enough to overcome not enacting a small increase this year. And to further complicate the situation, future housing developments that would increase district enrollment might put you in a position of needing to build a new school or expand existing schools. So it would seem to be in everyone's interest to plan for that possibility. I wasn't at the most recent Finance Committee meeting, but I was able to listen to it online. I particularly noted the discussion of the district's total property value having increased by 3% last year, and as a result, the district collected 3% more. Based on that information, there was a conclusion that, quote, everyone in the district's property values went up, unquote. My understanding is that everyone's property values only change when there's a county-wide reassessment. And Cumberland County hasn't done a county-wide reassessment since 2010. Rather, it appears to me that the assessed value of new businesses in the district, and to a lesser degree new homes, increased the total property value within our school district by 3% last year. That's much different than everybody's assessed property value having gone up. And for anyone in the homestead farmstead program, my understanding is their net property taxes went down last year. Also, I'm a retiree, and I appreciate that board members are concerned about those of us on a fixed income. However, I'm also a grandparent, and I appreciate the importance of providing a quality education to all of the school-age children throughout our community. Please keep in mind that having great K-12 schools providing a high-quality education tends to attract people to an area, thus increasing market values of homes. For any board member who goes door to door someday and maybe speaks with residents at a couple dozen houses, you might hear similar concerns expressed by many of those people. Likewise, if you see neighbors at church or the grocery store, some of them might feel the same way. And you might conclude that a high percentage of the people in your township share a particular concern. But on the other hand, you've talked to a rather small percentage of the people in the township, so can you really draw a valid conclusion? And yet, we often hear such assertions about how the majority feels about something based on the input of a few. Specific to property taxes, I don't expect they'll ever be popular. But unless our representatives in Harrisburg come up with an alternative, that's our primary means of funding public education in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. Okay, presentation of the budget update by Mrs. Lenz, please.
Good evening. So as Mr. Worrell said, we're going to take a look at the 25-26 budget. So we haven't heard a lot of any updates from the state or any other updates, but we did make one change from the last time that I presented. So if you recall, a few meetings ago, there was a request by the board to look into how we can record the special education consortium activities from other school districts utilizing Big Spring School District services. So one idea that was floated at the board level was to create its own fund or cost center. After having a conversation with our local auditors, we could handle it that way, but another easier way to do it would be to remove those revenues that we receive in from other school districts attending, where the students are attending our school, remove those revenues and also remove those expenditures from the budget. So then that will lower the expenses that we use to calculate the PDE 363 tuition for cyber charter schools. So that's what you see here. Based on historical information, we had budgeted $625,000 in revenues for the money we get in from our consortium schools in the special education for students attending here. Likewise, we put $625,000 in the expense side. So we pulled out $625,000 of revenues and $625,000 of expenses. Still, the deficit for the administration recommended budget of 1.5% tax increase stays the same at about $1.39 million. Just showing what that looks like again for the other scenarios, a 1%, a 0.5%, and a 0%. Again, the deficits don't change, just the revenue and expense side changes to remove that consortium activity from our budget. So you can see that on a 1% tax increase, we're still looking at a deficit of about 1.5 million, a 0.5% tax increase of 1.7, and a 0% tax increase of 1.8 million. I just want to be clear though, the PDE 363 that is used to calculate the tuition for cyber charter schools is based on budget. So we are making an adjustment to our budget. However, when the actual revenues come in, we'll still have to post those actual revenues to the consortium revenue line item, and of course those expenses will show. So when you look at a budget to actual at the end of the fiscal year, it's going to look like we didn't budget any revenues, but we did get revenues in. But again, the PDE 363 does not look at actuals anymore. It just looks at the budget side of things. So budget timeline, so we're here tonight at the Finance Committee meeting. The next date that we need to be aware of is making our proposed final budget available for public inspection, which has to happen 20 days prior to the final budget being adopted. That has already been put on our website. That was put on our website last week. I'm gonna skip ahead one slide and I'll come back. So you can find it two places on our website. I know this is kind of small, but if you go to our district homepage and you scroll down under district news, you can find a link there that will take you to the proposed final budget. Or if you're familiar with the finance page, under the services tab, when you get to that home page, you can see there in red down at the bottom, it says about notice proposed final budget. You can also click on the link there to view the proposed final budget. And then next deadline we need to be aware of is we have to advertise in the paper when the board plans to advertise or to take adoption of the final budget, and that has to be done at least 10 days in advance. So we will be running an ad in the Valley Times-Star on June 4th, letting the public know that the final budget is out there for public inspection and that the board plans to adopt the final budget at the June 23rd meeting, and then it'll run in the Sentinel on June 5th. And then, of course, as Mr. Worrell said, the board's slated to take action on June 23rd. So that brings me to this slide. We have talked about some of these things in the past, just asking the board to keep in mind that not only for the current budget, but for the future budgets, some of the things that we've talked about that we need to keep in mind as we plan not only again for this budget, but we look forward to the future and making sure that we have a budget that's sustainable and can cover all the different costs that either we can project or that we aren't able to potentially project. So that brings me to this slide. Is there any questions for me this evening?
Dr. Carante, Mrs. Lance, I don't know who to direct this to. Do we have any idea how many cyber students were in the graduating class, and then how many might be coming in to first grade, or we don't know? We really don't have that information. The seniors that left that were in cyber will now be off that number, but then there'll be new ones coming in possibly.
We kept the budgetary expenses associated with outside cyber charter relatively consistent.
Okay.
So we did not, and that's kind of what Mrs. Lynch just went through. There's no variability relative to that built into the budget. So if there's some sort of reformation at the state level where there's a flat tuition rate and that reduces it from our current expenditures, that's not in this particular budget.
Right.
And if we go from 200 to 300 cyber charter, that's not in this budget either.
Right.
It's just based on real-time experience at the present time.
Good.
So, Mr. Wardle, I don't have the numbers with me, but I think it might have been the March Finance Committee meeting. I did share how many students were going to graduate. Again, I don't have that number off the top of my head. It was a fairly, I think, large number. So we went ahead and backed that out of the budget, but we didn't project any new enrollments.
Right. As far as I mentioned this last meeting with the state and federal funding, we're just at a win. We have no idea at this point how much federal will affect us and how much state and when the state money will come through. Do you agree with that?
That is correct. Most of the time, school districts have to pass their budgets before we know what's happening at the state or federal level.
That's a difficult unknown, I think, because we could do better in our budget if we knew what our revenue was going to be, but we're kind of in the dark. We're kind of a year behind. Other questions from the board? So on the schedule, we can still, ask questions to Dr. Grante and Mrs. Lentz. We do not have a meeting until the 23rd. It will be advertised for the public to see. You can look on the website. We've had lots of, I think, preparation and numbers to look at. Budgets have been brought in. A lot of things were kept the same, I believe, as far as last year, like the maintenance and other, sections of the budget. I think we're very close. However, there is increases in salaries, in benefits, in teachers, and there's several things that are costs that are above last year. Even utilities, electric, some of that is still variable. So the 23rd, we have to keep in mind not just what the budget will be, but then how that will have an impact in the future and how that will, it's kind of a long-term effect, because if you have a 1.5% raise, that will be a cumulative thing that will help in the future, not just this year. I do know the VOTEC budget is more than it was last year, and there's some other costs that I'm not sure they figured out, like salary of new instructors and the cost of the building and other things. We have a budget. We've paid our $2.1 million towards that. We didn't have to borrow money for that, but there may be other costs coming that they didn't tell us. Would you agree, Dr. Ante?
Absolutely. There's going to be residual costs there that we're not aware of at the present time.
Right. I mean, just a janitor to clean the new building. Well, that wasn't really in the budget of the building. And maintenance and heating and some of those things. So some of those costs will probably come within the year. Other comments from Mrs. Lentz before we adjourn the Finance Committee meeting, and then the next time we'll kind of deal with this will be the 23rd.
I have the March paperwork here, and it says the FY 24-25, there were 22 graduates, which were cyber, 10 regular, 12 special education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mrs. Lance, those would have been removed and nobody else was replacing those, right?
That is correct.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting for June 2nd? Motion, Mrs. Booth. Do I have a second? Second, Mrs. Shea. There is no discussion. I assume everyone's voting in the affirmative unless I hear a negative or abstaining. Finance Committee meeting is adjourned. We will go to the regular board meeting, but we will Committee of the Whole, which will start at 7 o'clock. We have a presentation by Dr. Carnes, from the principal from the high school, so that will begin promptly at 7. Thank you all for coming this evening.